The first time I saw a white Tesla parked on my front lawn, I thought it was an honest mistake. By the third morning, I realized it wasn't. Every single day, the HOA president treated my property like it belonged to her, smiling as she walked away while my grass sank deeper under the weight of her luxury car. I asked politely. I installed signs. I even showed her the property survey. She laughed and told me the HOA had community parking rights. She had no idea I'd already confirmed the truth with the county. So instead of arguing one more time, I ordered 30 tons of mulch and waited for the perfect morning she parked there again. My name is Grant Holloway, and I'd owned my corner lot in Maple Ridge Estates for almost 9 years without a single dispute. One reason I bought the house was the oversized front lawn. It wasn't just grass. It was part of my property according to the official county survey, extending several feet farther than most neighbors assumed. I spent weekends maintaining it myself, planting fresh sod every spring and keeping the edges sharp enough that people often complimented it while walking their dogs. Then Lorraine Beckett, the HOA president, bought the house across the street. Within weeks, she started acting as if the neighborhood belonged to her. Every conversation ended with a reminder that she ran the community. The first morning I found her white Tesla parked halfway across my lawn. I figured she had guests and needed extra space. I knocked on her door, smiled, and politely asked if she could move it because the tires were crushing newly planted grass. She barely looked up from her phone before saying, "It's only for a few minutes." The next day it happened again, then the next. Soon it became part of her routine. She left her Tesla there while attending HOA meetings, chatting with neighbors, or walking around inspecting houses for violations. Tire tracks began cutting through the soft ground after every rain, leaving ugly ruts that took days to repair. When I asked again, Lorraine simply shrugged and claimed the grassy strip was shared community space. I knew she was wrong because I had the original property survey from my home purchase. Still, she refused to listen. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about parking anymore. Lorraine wanted everyone to accept that whatever she said automatically became the rule. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't about to surrender my property or let the HOA rewrite my deed. I decided to handle everything the right way before considering anything else. I printed a fresh copy of my county property survey, highlighted the exact boundary lines, and even placed bright landscaping stakes along the edge of my lawn. Beside them, I installed a simple sign that read, "Private property, no parking." I thought that would end the problem. It didn't. The very next morning, Lorraine drove straight over the stakes, parked her Tesla in the same spot, and walked away without a second glance. One of the wooden markers snapped under her tire. When I confronted her, she folded her arms and smiled. "The HOA board already discussed this," she said. "That section is available for community use." I asked her to show me the rule. She couldn't. Instead, 2 days later, I received an HOA violation letter accusing me of installing unauthorized obstructions in a common area. According to the notice, I had 10 days to remove the stakes and sign or face a $250 fine. I actually laughed when I read it. They weren't just ignoring my property rights. They were officially documenting a false claim. Rather than argue, I began collecting evidence. I installed security cameras covering the entire front yard. Every morning they recorded Lorraine arriving at almost the exact same time, steering her Tesla onto my lawn, locking it, and walking away as if she owned the place. I saved every video, photographed every fresh tire mark, and kept copies of every HOA letter they sent. Then I noticed something interesting. A landscaping company had started replacing flower beds around the neighborhood using mountains of fresh hardwood mulch. One afternoon, I watched dump trucks unload enormous piles near the clubhouse, and an idea formed almost instantly. It was completely legal, involved nothing that could damage her car, and would make one very important point. All I needed now was patience, and one more morning when Lorraine parked exactly where she always did. I spent the next few days making quiet phone calls instead of making threats. The county planning office confirmed my survey was accurate. The property line was exactly where I'd always believed it was, and the HOA had absolutely no authority to designate my front lawn as community parking. I asked one more question that changed everything. Was there any restriction on placing landscaping materials on my own property? The answer was simple: none, as long as I stayed within local ordinances and didn't block the public sidewalk or street. That afternoon, I ordered 30 tons of premium hardwood mulch from a local supplier. I instructed the driver to arrive early Friday morning, just after Lorraine usually parked her Tesla before the monthly HOA inspection walk. At 8:05 a.m., right on schedule, her white Tesla rolled onto my lawn. She climbed out, locked the doors with a confident beep, and disappeared down the sidewalk carrying her clipboard. I waited 5 minutes, then waved the dump truck forward. The driver looked at the parked Tesla and raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" I handed him a copy of my property survey and pointed to the open section of my lawn surrounding the car. "Spread the mulch evenly across my property," I said. "Just don't touch the vehicle." For the next 20 minutes, the truck unloaded massive piles of mulch all around the Tesla, leaving a wide safety gap so nothing contacted the paint. By the time the crew finished, the car sat in the middle of what looked like a giant landscaped island, surrounded by towering mounds of mulch on every side. There was no damage, no scratches, and no blocked public road. Just a perfectly legal landscaping project on my own land. When Lorraine returned and saw her Tesla trapped in the middle of my brand new mulch installation, the confident smile she'd worn for months vanished instantly. She reached for her phone, and within minutes, police officers were pulling into the neighborhood. By the time the patrol officers stepped out of their cruisers, half the neighborhood had gathered along the sidewalks. Lorraine rushed toward them before I could say a word, pointing at her Tesla and insisting I'd buried her car out of spite. She demanded that I be arrested for vandalism and claimed I'd intentionally trapped her property. One officer walked over to me and calmly asked for my side of the story. I handed him a folder I'd prepared days earlier. Inside were the county survey, the property deed, copies of every HOA violation notice, timestamps from my security cameras, and photos showing Lorraine parking on my lawn day after day despite multiple warnings. The officer spent several minutes reviewing everything while his partner measured the property markers I'd recently reinstalled. Then came the question that changed the entire conversation. "Lorraine," the officer said, "do you have permission from the homeowner to park here?" She hesitated. "No, but the HOA controls this area." The officer shook his head. "The county records say otherwise." Silence spread across the crowd. He explained that my mulch had been placed entirely on my private property and that the landscaping hadn't touched or damaged the Tesla. There was no criminal offense. In fact, the only repeated violation supported by the evidence was Lorraine's unauthorized use of someone else's land. The officer politely told her she was free to arrange for the mulch to be removed at her own expense if I agreed, or she could wait until I finished my landscaping project. Since the car wasn't damaged and still had a safe path once a small section was cleared, it wasn't considered unlawfully trapped. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, Lorraine had no clever response. And just when I thought the embarrassment was over, one of my neighbors quietly handed the officer something that made him turn back toward the HOA president with a very different expression. The neighbor handed the officer a folder filled with photos, emails, and copies of complaints that several homeowners had been too intimidated to file. As it turned out, I wasn't the only person Lorraine had been targeting. She had ordered residents to remove fences that were fully approved, threatened fines over imaginary rules, and even told one elderly couple that part of their driveway belonged to the HOA when county records clearly proved otherwise. The officer explained that these weren't issues he could settle on the spot, but he strongly encouraged everyone to report any suspected fraud or harassment through the proper county offices. That single conversation gave my neighbors the confidence they'd been missing for years. Within 2 weeks, The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Attendance was the highest anyone could remember. Homeowners arrived carrying property surveys, photographs, and copies of Lorraine's violation letters. One by one, they shared stories that sounded almost identical to mine. The board had no choice but to investigate. The results were devastating for Lorraine. The investigation concluded that she had repeatedly exceeded her authority and issued enforcement notices with no legal basis. She was removed as HOA president by a board vote. Several fines were canceled, and the association adopted a new policy requiring every future property dispute to be verified against official county records before any violation could be issued. As for me, my lawn recovered beautifully beneath a fresh layer of mulch and new sod. The tire tracks disappeared, and no one ever parked on my property again. Every time I walked past that corner, I smiled, not because I had trapped a Tesla, but because standing up for my rights reminded the entire neighborhood that an HOA can enforce rules, but it can never rewrite a property deed.